Hello, welcome everyone to our webcast, Cyber Resilience, Offensive Security for Post-Attack Recovery. We're excited to have all of you here today and to have Bishop Fox's CISO, Christie Terrill, and VP of Consulting and Cosmos, Tom Eston, join us as we explore how we're going to leverage offensive security strategies to not only prevent a cyber incident, but also critically in the aftermath when a cyber attack occurs. Before we get started, I do just want to remind you that you can freely comment through the chat module, as well as you can ask any questions in the dedicated Q&A module. At this time, I'd love for both Christie and Tom to introduce themselves.
Great, I'll go first. Hi, everyone. I'm Christie Terrill. I've been with Bishop Fox for quite a while, about 15 years. I'm based here in New York City, and some of the roles that I've had here at Bishop Fox, in addition to CISO, have been overseeing some of our delivery services, as well as head of customer success, and being client-facing as I am as our CISO as well. So I have a lot to share about how I've seen things evolve over time with what our clients need to do post-attack. I'm looking forward to sharing it with you.
All right, and I am Tom Eston. I'm the VP of Consulting and Cosmos at Bishop Fox. I am not as OG as Christie, but I have been at Bishop Fox for 3.5 years now. And I have a background in offensive security, as well as working for large financial institutions, working for product companies. I've got a lot of experience over about 18 years in the industry, specifically in the offensive security space. So I'm really excited to talk to you all about things that I've seen, things that my team has seen, and in working with our clients of how do we help clients get past a breach? What do we do from a post-attack perspective? And really, what things can you take back to your organization after we discuss those things?
Perfect. Thanks, Christie and Tom. And I am Rachel Chisholm. I'm the Director of Content Marketing here and will be your moderator for today's webcast. Before we kick off, I do want to quickly review through our focus for today as we specifically go into the role of offensive security during an attack, post-attack, how to build that customer trust using offensive security. We also are going to talk about patching and fixing vulnerabilities, as well as continuous testing. And then we'll wrap with a dedicated Q&A session. So let's get started. Our first question that I want to ask you guys. Most people think of offensive security as programs and tactics that are planned out in advance in line with, a larger schedule of priority for the organization. But how have you seen offensive security play a role during a live attack?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think what comes to mind first is just the amount of ransomware attacks that we have seen on organizations, I mean, globally, across the world, but just within our clients as well, is pretty staggering. I mean, this is backed up by, all the recent research from the Verizon DBIR that just came out recently, and other reports that we just constantly keep hearing about in the media. And so the way that organizations have had to respond to ransomware, and the other thing I want to cover too a little bit later is around third-party apps and third-party vendors that might be part or working with your organization, what the risk is there if they get breached and somehow that becomes your problem as well. And these are things we are seeing in the news all the time. But I look and think about what our clients have been doing and how we've been helping them get through an attack or post-breach. And with ransomware specifically, what's interesting is that we've really had to work with these organizations and figure out, where in the attack surface what did the breach start? And so there's been a lot of work that we have to do with the IR teams, with the IT teams within an organization to kind of understand, okay, so, you had a whole department, as an example, compromised through ransomware. What was the attack vector? And it's really important for the offensive security team within an organization to be assisting the IR teams, the IT teams, of understanding where that attack had started, What was the attack vectors in play? Was that a vulnerability from a missing patch? Was it an employee that was social engineered? Was it a third-party vendor that was involved through a connection, perhaps through an API or through some other connection? And we have to understand that. And so that's why it's really important for the offensive security team to be part of those conversations and that investigation, because typically in a good offensive security program, those individuals are going to have an understanding of the attack surface. They're typically going to be continuously, or hopefully continuously, testing the attack surface and the environment and understanding where those vulnerabilities are, how those attack vectors, if there was a vulnerability that could be leveraged during an attack, and then providing that information back to those IR teams and the IT teams to assist in kind of that post-remediation. So I kind of go back to, when I'm thinking of third-party breaches, I think of the Target breach many years ago, but still very relevant, right? Where Target had still one of the largest, I think, credit card breaches in US history, and that was all through a third party. And you think of that from a risk perspective, the offensive security team needs to understand where those third-party applications are, how they are tested. In fact, hopefully they're doing some of their own testing with that, and that can really help a lot from a post-breach perspective.
So thinking about the post-attacks then, what's the first thing that you think of in terms of like what role offensive security can play, right? So we've talked about like steering the attack itself, but now that the attack has been able to, be calmed down in a way where you can start thinking about post-attack and what next steps need to happen for that recovery process, what's that first thing that you think about for offensive security?
Yeah, really the first thing is getting systems back up and running. That is usually the priority. That's something that we have seen and continue to see with large breaches, such as the United Healthcare breach, obviously of critical importance, right? Where pharmacies and all of the associated systems need to come back up in place. Criticality of getting systems up is very important. And that's where offensive security can also help. So in terms of checking to make sure that new systems that are coming online, perhaps those systems were rebuilt, reconfigured, reimaged, or what have you, they need to be tested, they need to be assessed, and we need to make sure that those systems are secure and free of any malware, free of any other backdoors, anything else that might be lingering in those systems. So there's a large effort with offensive security to kind of help assist both your IR and your IT teams in getting those systems back up and running, making sure they're secure. Patching is another area, right, where if a exploit or an attack happened through a patch that didn't get out there quite in time, or just from a vulnerable system, ensuring that the entire attack surface is looked at to ensure that the systems are patched, that they are secure, and that it's okay to start doing business again.
Yeah, I'd really like to, that's great, Tom. I'd like to add to that with just my perspective. So in my role as CISO as Bishop Fox, also having been interim CISO for other organizations, and also here being the head of customer trust, customer success in the past, I think of customer trust. And, for us as Bishop Fox, it's, we're business to business, but there is the aspect of business to business or business to consumer. And so, even when it's not just a full-on breach, if there's a mistake that's been made, how are we as the company, involved, how are we going to get ahead of that and be sensitive to our customers' concerns and their interpretation of the events that led to that incident? So there are a lot of ways to restore customer trust, but a few of them that come to mind that relate to offensive security is, first of all, transparency, owning the mistake, sharing the plans to resolve it, and letting them know what we're going to do to prevent this from happening again. That is just, I think, in any kind of, no matter whose fault it was, third party, your own development team, doesn't matter, really owning that. Then external validation. And so, if a customer has reason to believe that you weren't on top of your game for some reason, then it's kind of fair for them to question your ability to self-correct. And that's where third-party services and third-party offensive security services can really play a key role. Because past the initial triage and incident response efforts, there's still a lot to do for any organization to self-check, make sure that we believe as an organization we have things, whether it's back online or patched or secure. But having that third party check your defenses and the controls you have in your environment, I think is really important. And customers may want, reasonably so, much more recent assessment results from your pen testing, from your monitoring than you have at hand. You might say, oh, we do annual testing, but that was 11 months ago. If you've had an event, a breach, an incident, whatever it's qualified as, your customers are going to want much more real kind of attestation that you are in a secure state, and they're often not going to take your own word for it. And that's why bringing in a third party to help with that can be really important. And that's where offensive security services that people don't often think of as part of a post-breach kind of immediate need can really play a role. And there's also one more thing to add. You may need to provide some letters of assessment or reports to your clients based on each environment or service or app that's tested. And this is also an opportunity to introduce more iterative or real-time type testing activities, because even we can say this as someone who does point-in-time pen tests, they can be out of date if there's any further changes to your environment. So when you talk about getting ahead of how you're going to prevent this from happening again, you need to take a closer look at what type of more real-time and iterative testing that you can introduce now to give that assurance that moving forward, you would catch something like this or prevent something like this in the future.
Yeah, exactly. We've got a question that came in, and it kind of circles back a little bit, Tom, to what you were saying, and that is from Peter. And he said, once symptoms start to show up, what are the first things to do then, right? So I think that actually kind of goes back more to even a live attack when those first symptoms come up. He's asking unplug, reboot, what should you be doing? So I love, Tom and Christie, any insights from you guys, once the radars go off, what is that first thing that you would recommend?
Yeah, well, the first thing I recommend is, having your IR team or an IR professional be engaged immediately. That's the first step, right? I would not be going to my pen test or offensive security team to find out what to do. Hopefully, an organization has a detailed incident response plan of steps to take first, who should be contacted, what that call tree is, and start triaging the incidents. I would not recommend the first thing you should do is a pen test, right? That is probably way further down the list than engaging your IR teams who will know what to do, right? Whether that is, holding systems in place, it can vary, right? Depending on the type of attack. But start with your IR teams first and then work with your offensive security teams after.
Perfect. And Christie, you mentioned in your answer a lot of customer trust, right? And I know it's from the research reports that, Tom, that you had mentioned, Verizon DBIR versus like Ponemon State of Security, all of those reports, customer trust and reputation is one of the biggest concerns for people when it comes to cybersecurity, especially post-attack. Christie, I'd love for you to go more into that customer trust, and are there specific stakeholders that you need to be rebuilding that trust with, and where does offensive security help in that process?
Sure. Well, one interesting angle to this is there's actually internal stakeholders that may need this assurance as well. So whether you're a big or small company, you have teams like your sales team, your risk management or internal audit team, your broader executive team, who have varying levels of technical awareness and understanding of nuance and how this could come to be. And so there's actually some, internal management to be done on giving them assurance of those same elements I said around the kind of transparency of like what's happened and how we're going to prevent this. Now, depending on the root cause of the incident, So like, is it an internally developed application, or is it a third-party service? That influences which processes need a closer look, right? Because was it, a third-party supply chain type of risk that we, maybe didn't appropriately mitigate, that we accepted, or is it something that we actually introduced directly by our own development team? So, then you can it's not about laying blame. I mean, in all the work that I've done in this industry, I'm very objective. It's all about finding out like what happened so that we can fix it. It's not about blaming a person or a team. Root cause analysis is really just what can we change about that so it doesn't happen again. But giving that assurance to those other internal teams as well as your customers, again, whether it be other businesses or consumers as well, it's just so important, because many of us, Bishop Fox included, our reputation is essentially our business. And if you are providing direct services to consumers, or you're providing financial management services, like any of those things are near and dear to people's, hearts, wallets, minds, healthcare services, etc.
So I would love for you to elaborate even more on like those critical next steps. Yeah. Would you mind going into that just a little further for us?
Sure. Well, I think I can distill it down just into a couple of key steps, just to recap what I've been elaborating on. So first of all, I'm not going to get into specifics of like SEC or other required disclosures, as that is very much case by case on your industry and the type of event, the type of company. There are rules and matrices to tell you what you have to do for that. So, kind of box that to the side, but it's communication with the impacted customers. Again, it could be clients and other businesses, or it could be consumers. So think about that communication. There is such a thing as doing it too soon. I mean, you always have to get a handle on what's going on, but you also don't want to be in the news before you've had a chance to, understand yourself. What can we say about this? What can we say that we understand about this event? So, communication with the impacted customers is really number one, most important. And then two, providing that third-party validation of your remediation efforts. So it's not quite incident response. It's what have you done to near term fix that from not happening again? And then it begs the question on what are you going to be doing in the future to prevent this from popping up somewhere else? So you're not playing whack-a-mole and saying, yep, we fixed that app, we're good. And then it begs the question of, well, what about all the other apps you have, right? And so being very clear about what proactive monitoring or services have you now introduced to prevent this from happening again in the future. And you don't even have to get so specific as to, certain technologies or products. It's just really about giving confidence in your programmatic efforts to catch things before they become wider problems. I mean, companies all the time are catching security alerts or security incidents that don't become breaches, right? So that's really important. I think we all can recognize that, those especially people who are blue team in defense. It's kind of, these get into the news when they become true, reportable incidents and breaches, but there are things that happen all the time where you may still have to go through these steps of communication, third-party validation, and some extra proactive efforts, even if it's not some kind of category of a public security breach.
Perfect. So I think kind of going back, Tom, beyond customer trust, Tom, you specifically mentioned patching and fixing vulnerabilities. Could you give us some examples of how Bishop Fox or you in your experience have helped clients do that in that post-incident?
Yeah, it's the two big ones that come to mind are MoveIt and the Palo Alto network OS vulnerabilities that we see pretty much once a month at this point. But we have many clients that have been affected by both of those major vulnerabilities or series of vulnerabilities. And one of the great things of Bishop Fox and our Cosmos product is our ability to quickly identify and find those assets that have those associated vulnerabilities. And that's something that I think all organizations need to strive for, is part of that continuous testing and monitoring piece, because it is so difficult to just immediately respond on your own as an organization to whatever the latest major vulnerability is, such as like Move It, which is a great example, which just took organizations by surprise. That a lot of organizations didn't even know that they had this file transfer ability, right? On their network. And one thing that like Cosmos does, and I'm sure there's other services too, is identifying what those assets are that have those vulnerabilities, and then quickly being able to respond and remediate. So a good provider like Bishop Fox should be able to tell you where those vulnerabilities are, how to remediate them, and then assist you through that process. And all of that should be in real time. So there shouldn't be any type of, I'm waiting for a report and it's going to take 2 days to get this report so I can take action on that. These things should all be in real time, and they should be immediate, because this is the nature of the world that we live in these days. Vulnerabilities and exploits happen within minutes, and the threat landscape, depending on your industry and depending on your organization, can change very frequently, and you have to stay up to date on that. And that is why there has to be some type of continual monitoring. I know there are some organizations that have large capabilities and probably large pocketbooks that can do this on their own, but that's really where you need a third party to come in and really assist you getting that continuous monitoring in place.
So with that continuous testing just being so crucial in the post-breach, can you explain more about like what that is and why that's important, that continuous always-on testing versus maybe some point-in-time testing that a lot of pen testers do?
Yeah, it's a great question. Over the years, we have seen the shift in penetration testing and now what we call offensive security, really moving from that point-in-time assessment to something more continuous. And again, that is driven by the change in the threat landscape and the speed at which attackers are moving in this kind of modern world that we live in, right? We have everything kind of going against organizations. We have AI now. We have, nation state attackers that have unlimited funds, unlimited money, as well as organized crime that is using things like ransomware that you hear about the news every day. But that has really driven the shift from this point in time, as Christie has mentioned. You get a report, that report is out of date, usually within minutes. It is only a snapshot of an organization's security or a subsection of that organization's security. So we have to evolve offensive security into this continuous mindset to address today's real threats. And a lot of that these days requires more advanced testing. It requires more technology, and it requires expertise from a team that leverages technology and automation to make those efficiencies and to create that real-time and continuous aspect of testing. So one of the things that we do at Bishop Fox is with our Cosmos attack surface management offering is a continuous look at your attack surface. It's continuously looking for new vulnerabilities, emerging threats that are coming out, and taking action immediately to work with your teams to address those vulnerabilities. So think of it as more of like a continuous pen test in a lot of ways. And then of course you can dive deeper into applications. Like we offer a continuous application penetration test as well, which is doing an initial assessment and then doing testing after that for changes and things within the application. But this is really the evolution of things, and organizations need to start doing this, because just that one time or that one compliance test that you do every year for PCI or whatever regulatory requirements you have, it just isn't enough.
I'd actually, can I piggyback on that real quick?
Yes, please do.
So, I'm actually in a unique position here because while I understand what kind of services we offer our customers, I also am a consumer of those same services. So one of the things I'd like to just share kind of as an anecdote, as a case study, if you will, is the ability to be told from a provider that you have an emerging, like they are aware of an emerging threat that may impact your environment. You go, oh, okay. So let's say it was Move It or the Palo Alto OS example. You're already hearing about it amongst your peers. You're already hearing about it in the technical news, you follow. And then your provider tells you, we're aware of this. We're checking for it. We'll be in touch soon. And then with single-digit hours, you then get an answer back. Your environment is not susceptible to this, or you are, and it's in these 3 places. This is what you have to remediate, and here's how to do it. Just that level of assurance and confidence that you don't have to scramble and do all that work yourself, and maybe not have a handle on your attack surface, or maybe have the technical resources in-house to do that level of analysis, is fantastic.
I think that's really, really great. And it just reminds me of how many cyber incidences and breaches we see in the news. I think I open up the news and there's a new one every single day, right? Some more extensive than others. Some have been highly, highly targeted in the healthcare area. And, I think what I would love to know, and maybe even our audience too, is like, how do we learn from some of those happenings, right? How do we make sure that doesn't become us? And I'd love to get kind of y'all's insights, from what y'all seen and what y'all know in certain situations or in certain breaches, as to, how can we prevent, or if we end up in that same situation, how can we make sure we get out of it with a more positive outcome?
Yeah, I guess I'll add to kind of what's already been said. I think, it's tough, trying to stay ahead of everything that we continuously see in the news. But I kind of look at it as, who are your partners through all this? And, Christie had mentioned kind of your internal partners and your external partners. And I think that's so important. So when I talk to organizations, we first ask, who is going to help you through a breach if it was going to happen? And we all know that it's usually a matter of time. Everybody or every org is going to get hacked in some way, shape, or form. So who are your partners? And I know for some organizations, like a financial institution as an example, you're probably going to leverage, your people like your risk department, your internal audit. You have to have good relationships with all of those other areas of the business to kind of get through a breach. And then who are your external partners, right? Do you have a third party that you can go to? Someone had mentioned, what if you don't have an IR team in your organization in the chat? We'll find a partner that does, right? Find a professional, find an organization that has that capability, and then you can leverage that if the time comes. So I think it's just holistically looking at who are your partners, who's going to help you, and then thinking about making sure you have the right processes within to address any breach situation that might come up.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on that too, just to answer the gentleman's question about IR and maybe not having a team or a plan. We see very small companies who are releasing one app and maybe don't have that kind of technical team on site, as you're saying. And we also work with Fortune, 10, 20, 50, 100 companies who clearly do have their own team. To what Tom just said, you don't even have to pay an upfront retainer. You just have to identify now, who will you call? How much will it cost when you call them? Just get that pricing up front, get a quote that's good for a year or 2 years or something like that. Just have some of those relationships built. It does not mean you have to have an entire in-house team. There should be some type of plan to at least just be, who's on first, who's on second from an incident management standpoint internally. That can go a long way, just so there's not chaos, just so if one person's out, one person's not available, there's maybe a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 type of person, even up to your executive level, of like who's going to be the point person to try to think through this if it happens.
Perfect. And we've got a few more questions that have come in as well. So I'd love to address those. We have one that says, how do you prioritize which systems or vulnerabilities to address first during an active attack, and what criteria guide these decisions?
Yeah, I'll take part of that question. So I think it's understanding your assets, where your assets are in the organization, and then the attack surface ultimately, right? And this is a hard problem, right? Asset management is just a major issue for most organizations these days. And of course, there's a lot of tools and a lot of solutions and vendors out there that can help you with asset management, but that really is the initial piece of it, right? You have to understand where your assets are, and then you have to understand the risk of those assets. So there has to be a discussion of what are your most critical assets, whether those are applications, those are systems, kind of getting back to the old mantra of what are your crown jewels of the organization, and then how are those jewels protected. But it can be difficult, right? If you're a major institution that has 30,000-40,000 employees, I mean, that attack surface can be massive. But that's where a third party can assist, like Bishop Fox, understanding your attack surface, prioritizing, and then assigning a risk type of assessment, or doing a risk assessment on those assets is really important, because we know we can't cover everything, but we as an organization, I think, can do a good job of at least understanding where those assets are with the right tools, with the right, procedures in place, and then kind of going from there. But yeah, it kind of all starts with understanding your assets.
I have a slightly different angle on that question. Just with my experience building out programs for organizations that often last 12 months or 2 years or longer. And it could be for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it is post-breach, sometimes it's just strategic and we want to improve. I see it as if it truly is even post-incident, maybe the question is, during the incident, how you prioritize your efforts. It's identifying what is the incident and vulnerabilities at hand, and it's remediating that you know about. Then it's looking kind of like a broader concentric circles. Then do we have any other assets that have that same risk of vulnerability? Do we have any other environments that have that same risk of vulnerability? And then you kind of keep doing that until you get to the level of processes and policies, like kind of like, how did we get here? How did we not catch this in the first place? What do we have to change, much more programmatically, whether it's development lifecycle steps, whether it's that third-party vendor assessment steps, like what was it that led us to not realize that this would be an issue? Because that's not what you're going to do first thing. First thing, you're going to remediate the one issue at hand and then kind of look for any related tangential issues. Another thing companies worry about, I think rightfully so, whether you get in the news like the Wall Street Journal or even kind of in the technical news websites about an issue, is that can make you right for other attacks, right? Other hackers can be like, oh, they just got popped. They're a cluster right now. Like, let me see what else I can find. So like, you are put in a vulnerable position when it's made public that you've had an issue. So that is kind of, again, I think it has kind of concentric circles, wider and wider, of looking at and triaging what issues you may have until you get to kind of that at a true programmatic level. What do we have to change in our policies, people, process, staffing, everything, to not have this happen again?
The next question actually goes hand in hand with the IR question. Not, some businesses don't have those in place, and I think that's probably the case for a lot of small to medium-sized businesses. And this question really goes into how can an SMB, rebuild that trust with their customers, as well as internal stakeholders, when they don't necessarily have these extensive resources?
Well, okay, so I'm going to give one answer. I mean, I'm probably not going to like it. It's going to cost you a lot of money, because you are going to have to overcycle on providing assurance. And especially if you're small already and you don't have that in-house talent, you're going to have to hire it from the outside. It's not even all things Bishop Fox can do. I'm not touting Bishop Fox here. I'm just saying you're going to have to bring in a lot of help to do all these activities to provide assurance that this won't happen again. It doesn't mean, though, the death of your reputation or the death of your business. It's just, I've never seen it be successful without organizations being able to kind of release their pocketbooks to just bring in experts. There's really no way around it. You're not going to be able to kind of, if you already are a small or medium-sized business, you're probably not going to be able to handle this type of response and ongoing efforts yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say unless you have some very talented people on your teams that can do all this by themselves, but I mean, that is very difficult, based on my experience too. Because a lot of it will have to do with your industry. Christie touched upon, regulations depending on your industry that you have to abide by. Some are way more strict than others and may mandate certain roles or mandate certain, types of programs that you have to implement or based on certain frameworks. So it can get complicated and very expensive very quickly.
But is there something else I'd like to add? As I've thought about this, as I started working with startups, even 10 years ago, who would have these concerns, startups who are high-tech startups providing a service, an application to much larger organizations, and they're feeling like, how could I possibly meet these expectations of these large companies? And yes, while that is a challenge, some of the breaches Tom mentioned, Target, we didn't mention the obvious, Equifax, some of those.
Mm-hmm.
These companies are still around. So while breaches occur and they can be very expensive to remediate and appropriately triage, it does not mean the death of your business. So I just want to say that because I was kind of saying, open your pocketbooks. I'm not like making it look like a cash grab. I'm just saying like you will have to bring in the experts, but it does not mean the death of your business. I have not personally worked with organizations that actually had to shut their doors because of the ramifications or costs of a security incident or breach.
Yeah, that's a great point. You see, the other thing I want to mention real quick, and we had touched upon communication. One piece of advice is definitely don't recommend in communications that you blame your users for the breach. I think there were a few recent examples over the last couple of months of organizations that for whatever reason, I think these were like related to password, the reason the breach happened was because our users were using easily guessable passwords or reusable passwords, and the attacker basically sprayed the passwords across and were able to break in that way. And users should change their passwords and be more secure, right? That's not the best way to handle the situation, right? Ultimately, that is the organization's responsibility of how users choose passwords, right? But in those communications, never come across as like blaming someone else other than, hey, we're taking responsibility and we're going to do better next time is a much better approach.
Well, perfect. That was actually our last question. So as we wrap up today, we would love to leave with you guys with a few helpful resources. So be sure to check out, we've got a report that Bishop Fox did with SANS Institute on the mind and method of modern adversaries. We also have a blog, I actually dropped in the chat, but we also have a blog on validating incident response plans with red team tabletop exercises. And then we have a video from our capabilities development team director on how zero-day disclosures alter attacker strategies. So we definitely recommend you guys check that out post-webcast. And thank you guys again for joining our conversation today. We invite y'all to check out our penetration testing services, as well as our Cosmos platform, and how Bishop Fox can help you prepare before and post cyber attacks on bishopfox.com. So thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.